Look at that. You all quieted down when I just stood up here. I like the power. Nice. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here for our afternoon seminar. My name is Cinnamon, and I'll be your host for this event. I'm looking around the room. Most of you have been here before, and I say this every week, but this is a hybrid event, so we have folks online and folks in the room. For folks online, thanks for being here. If you have any issues, you can't hear us, you can't see, please put a note into the chat box, and our volunteer, Roseanne, will help address those issues. That's also where you can put any questions for our speaker into the chat box, and Roseanne will read those out when we get to the question and answer, and so we can make sure that everybody can have an opportunity to interact with today's speaker. For folks in the room, when we get to that place where you have question and answer, just raise your hand and I'll bring you a mic. So I've got a couple of announcements before we get kicked off here. I want to just do a quick reminder that we have a lunch and learn tomorrow at noon in the library, where Martin Teal, who is a managing director of marine geo at the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center, is going to be coming to talk to us about monitoring coastal habitats with professional scientists and volunteers. And so that should be a really interesting talk. If you are able to join us at noon in the library tomorrow, that would be great. Other announcement is next week's seminar, already June 5th. Sally Hacker, which is Oregon State University's Department of Integrative Biology, will be here talking about a century of eel or beach grass invasion and the landscape level consequences on the Pacific Northwest coast. So hopefully you can come and join us June 5th. I'm also going to start making plugs for our Markham Symposium on June 18th. Which is a Wednesday this year because of the Juneteenth holiday on that Thursday. The Markham Symposium celebrates our Hatfield Student Award winners, and it has a keynote speaker, a poster session, Ignite talks. So I'm hoping that folks can come and join us on that Wednesday, and we'll kick that off at 2 here in the auditorium as well. And if you need anything, more information about any of our events, you can go to the HMSC events page, scroll down and find a calendar of events there with login information and anything you might need. But really why we're all here today is to listen to today's speaker. I'm going to do a quick introduction. So Reilly Boyt is our speaker for today, and her deep love of feeding ecology and studies grew from her very first job at the National Wildlife Research Center in Fort Collins, Colorado, where she got to dig around, those her words, in coyote stomachs for a diet and feeding ecological study. She then attended Scripps Institute of Oceanography at the University of California, San Diego, where she earned her her undergrad degree in marine biology. And in her final year there, she worked with NOAA's Southwest Fisheries Science Center in San Diego, where again she assisted with a diet study looking at various keystone shark and fish species using traditional stomach analysis. Reilly is currently a graduate student here at Hatfield in the Chapel Big Fish Lab and is interested again in diet and ecological studies of top predators that impact key fisheries and their ecological systems around them. Her research aims to determine the diet and feeding ecology of salmon sharks, and they are my very favorite sharks in the whole wide world, so I'm so excited to have Reilly's work happening around here. But outside of her academic pursuits, Reilly is the founder and CEO of the Disabilities Within Ocean Sciences, which is an organization dedicated to building a network and resource hub for disabled marine scientists at every career stage. She serves on the DEIC for the Western Society of Naturalists and on NSF's BioLeap Discovery Board. Her advocacy work focuses on promoting inclusivity and enduring equitability, access to research, academics, and field environments in the marine science community. And I think that's what she's going to be talking about today. So I'm going to hand this off to Reilly. Turn your mic on.
I just wait for it to go green. A little test. Can everyone hear me? Yes? Okay, awesome. Cool. Okay. Hopefully that works. It works? Nice. All right. Hi, everyone. Most of you know me. I'm Reilly, like Cinnamon said. For those that don't know, I'm the Chapel Big Fish Lab. I want to give a huge shout out to Cinnamon, for y'all for showing up, for Lisa for being the one to suggest that I do this talk. and Big Fish Lab for showing up and supporting me in this capacity. For the folks online, this will be available as a recorded with subtitles as well. So if you're struggling with that, you will have that option. But let's get into it. Today, we're going to be talking about breaking barriers below the surface, navigating challenges and solutions for accessible marine science. I promise I won't be talking about shark vomit too much. I don't think there's any in my talk, but if there is, clearly I have a love for stomachs at this point. Okay, so before we get started today, I have two asks for you. The first is that you're uncomfortable. We're going to be talking about some topics right now that are a little heated and can be uncomfortable just, when you encounter biases or these sort of conversations in these spaces. So I invite you to be happy in that discomfort because you're going to learn a lot and hopefully we get to make Hatfield and the greater scientific community a better place. I start every single one of my DEI or disability talks off with a quote by Dr. Nina Marshall, who is an absolute powerhouse in the IAGD. So geoscience, you're going to hear a lot of geoscience things today, and that's because they're about 10 years ahead of us in terms of their disability work, just in terms of funding, but it makes for really nice study cases. So what Dr. Nina Marshall says is we have a culture that says that if you cannot hike up that mountain with a pack on your back, you're less of a geoscientist. Field science is only inaccessible because we've decided it is. We've decided Mars. We're going there, so we're going to invent what we need to get there. We change that mindset and we can change this too. I want you to keep that in mind is I think we hit a lot of things in science on progress, but we also hit this is how it's always been done and we can't change it. And we know that's not the case. Things have been changed, things constantly evolve, and so we can make these changes quite easily in these spaces. Without further ado, obviously I'm a grad student. We're going to skip over all the Hatfield stuff because you got a very detailed bio from Cinnamon. I was a 10-year Paralympian with Team USA, so I am technically retired at the age of 29. Sorry, I'm turning 29 tomorrow. Age of 28, had a massive disabled community through that. I have a host of diet work behind me. I've been focused in stomachs and ecology, especially feeding studies, and then I've done a lot of disability advocacy work. So this is a small intro into me. I've been around the world and I've been in some truly extraordinarily beautiful places that have had some really, really bad accommodations. And I've been in places near here with great accommodations. And so there's no kind of one size fits all. I'm realizing I'm out of the box, Cinnamon, so I'm so sorry. For a quick overview of what we're going to do today, we're going to reframe the idea of disability and the broader issues of inaccessibility. We're going to talk about some of the experiences that disabled folks in STEM have had, some of which are my own. We'll go over some of those quick and easy fixes, which I feel like are a really nice way to just jumpstart into getting those inclusive conversations going. The hardier and sometimes the scarier necessary solutions. And then at the very end, I'll have a resource guide. So I will be throwing a lot of statistics at you. I'll be throwing a lot of different studies at you because we're scientists and I feel like evidence is always good. You don't have to take a picture of everything. At the very end, I'll have a QR code that you can use. It has resources, links, guides, videos, documentaries, my contact information, the contact information of other organizations that do work like this. So it's all a one-stop shop. So if you want to take out your phones, you can, or you can just wait till the end. And with that, I'm going to lure you in with a photo of a small little dwarf. Growing up, I think I knew I was going to be a marine scientist from a young age. I decided at 8 because it was really cool and things were gross in the water and I wanted to study that. Clearly that's continued with my work that I do now. But I didn't necessarily have anyone that looked like me in these spaces. Like there wasn't anyone that had dwarfism in these spaces. There wasn't anyone that was visibly disabled in these spaces. So I didn't really have anyone to look up to. I mean, physically, obviously, was looking up to, but in the sense of I didn't really have these mentors or marine scientists that looked like me and had the same struggles. And that kind of continued in a lot of the disability work that I do today, unrelated to marine science. So when talking about disability and talking about accommodations, often the accommodations that we talk about are going to be the ones that you assume. So like a wheelchair, blind, maybe a limb difference. Dwarfism isn't one of the ones that's often accommodated for or talked about in these spaces. And so I'm going to give you a very quick TLDR on dwarfism. I have achondroplastic dwarfism, which was an absolute mouthful as a child to have to learn to say. About 1 in 27,000 1,500 to 40,000. It kind of depends on the statistic or where in the world have achondroplasia dwarfism. We are the most, I was going to say readily available, but most common type of dwarfism out there. There are over 500 types, just like there's over 500 types of sharks, and I'm sure there's a correlation in there somewhere. But it's not often considered when you're thinking about accessibility. So when I talk about this, you see me, for those that see me on camera, it might not be as obvious, but I stand at 4'2" at 3/4. And I think when people think about these disabilities and they think about me in a disabled sense, they only think about the dwarfism. And while that might be one of the big barriers I face multiple others with other disabilities that I have. And with that, I'm going to ask you to all close your eyes. So I'm sure you thought this was going to be a very fun, interactive thing. And close your eyes, and I want you to picture or come up with a concept, but what do you think of when you hear the word disability? And if you want to shout out, you can. But what do you think of? Who do you think of when you think of disabled people? Don't say me. Anyone want to shout out? Nice. We have wheelchair users. Big Fish Lab, you got anything? There we go. But there are thousands and hundreds of disabilities out there, and I want this slide to look overwhelming because this is a very, sorry, you can open your eyes. This is a very, very small portion of a much larger spectrum of disability. There might be a few in there that you recognize, that you might identify with, that you have previously not thought of as a disability. That's okay, you can sit with that. There's a community out there for you. But disability is a multifaceted spectrum, and it has millions of different types of experiences and needs and accessibility. So when we talk about accessibility, some of the access needs that might benefit someone else might hinder another person. And that shouldn't be a concern, necessarily something that stops us from making more inclusive spaces or accommodations, but something that we should consider is that when we're thinking of disability, we want to kind of think about outside the box of what we typically think when we're thinking disabled. And there's also a social concept of disability and a physical concept of disability. And this is trying to get talked about a little bit more. So the physical, obviously, this is never going to get solved. It's never going to get cured. I'm never going to suddenly grow. I'm always going to be a dwarf. And so that's the physical. I have that impairment that's never going to change. But the social aspect is when I'm accessing a space might make my disability more of a impairment or a hindrance based on how that space is accessible to me. So if a space is accessible to me, I can walk in, I can experience everything as everyone else can, and I'm not having to sit there and figure out how to reach things or how to sit comfortably, then the social model of disability no longer applies. So when we're talking about these accommodations, we're thinking of them in the sense of that social model. So what can we change to bring disability to the same equitable standard as everything else? When we think about disability, I think most people think that they are within the minority. Unfortunately, that's not the case, or fortunately, depending on who you are. But about 1 in 4 people are disabled in the US. That makes about 20% of the global population, and it's the largest and most diverse marginalized group because anyone can become disabled at any time. There's no discrimination. You can be from any identity. You can be born with a disability. You can have a disability later in life. You can cycle in and out of disability. Taylor Chapel. Which is a joke we make often, but disability is such a big spectrum. And because of that, when we're talking about disability, it's really, really key. We think about the intersections that go along with it. Because if we're just thinking about disability and how to accommodate it and ignoring the intersection of race, of gender, and all the other things, we're ignoring the other marginalizations and the other ways that someone might experience a space. We need to take that into account. And so with that being said, I don't just have a physical disability. I have chronic pain, I am hard of hearing, and I have ADHD. I also identify as queer, so that I have a multitude of intersections. Typically, when I'm having these talks, people will come up after, and they're like, I'm disabled too, and I'm like, I'm just gonna cut you off. I don't actually need to know what your disability is. All I need to know is you have a disability. So for the purpose of this talk, I'll talk about my other disabilities, my medical history, because it's relevant, but it's not something that's necessarily owed within these conversations. And now to our favorite part, the intersection of science and disability and the perils of academia, a study by Atkins and Labarkin, and I'm fairly sure I always pronounce his first name wrong, shows that there are 75% less disabled people in STEM than in any other industry. 75%, that is a huge disparity. So flipping that number, about 3% of people in STEM are disabled. That was a NSF study a few years ago. That's a massive, massive disparity. And a lot of it is because of these field-based sciences that kind of hit on that hindrance. And they kind of reform the barriers that might not be necessary in other industries and aren't necessarily necessary in our industry. Inclusion of disabled people is not a hindrance for us in any sense of the way. Sorry, a little notification popped up on that. Thank you to OSU Media team for these pictures. I promise I was actually having quite a lovely time on the right side, but it works for a really good thing because I think when I have these conversations and when I started DWOS, which is Disability Within Ocean Science, I started to say, you know, like we need to make this more inclusive for disabled people. And I had a bunch of people that would be at a table and they'd say, well, why do we need to make this more inclusive for disabled people? They aren't even here. I'm like, yeah, no, that's actually, in fact, why we need to do it. They're not here because they can't even get through the door. We're not even talking about them as there's no seat on the table. The door is not wheelchair accessible. I can't get through it because there's steps. People can't pull it open that have muscular dystrophy. The door is not accessible. So what we need to focus on is getting people in the door. So that is on the right of when I show up to fieldwork, to a lab, to a conference, that's the face that I tend to make if it's inaccessible. And then every once in a while, you show up to somewhere like Hatfield Marine Science Center, the Big Fish Lab, and everything's accessible and it makes things a lot easier. And I can deal with the other barriers that as a queer woman, I would encounter in STEM. That's a whole other lecture that I won't be giving today. I, with 27 other co-authors back in 2021, authored this paper called What Can Professional Scientific Societies Do to Improve Diversity, Equity, Inclusion? And it was a case study using the American Elasma Brink Society, or AES, and it just looked, it was pretty extensive. It's an amazing article. It's linked at the end, but it went over kind of the barriers within this society that kind of impede people of different marginalized backgrounds from joining. And a few of those that we'll touch on today that a little bit, but it's quite a nuanced conversation, are the financial barriers to our field, the fieldwork barriers to our field. Conferences are incredibly inaccessible, academia, the cultural barriers, and the unconscious biases. And we dove pretty deep within this in terms of other marginalizations, but on the disability front, we focused really on the conference and the society side. And since this paper has come out, I've worked with, I think, 12 other conferences trying to make them more accessible. And this conversation keeps building and building, and more obstacles keep presenting themselves, which for less stubborn people would be very, very frustrating. It's a nice little challenge, and I think it also brings up a really good conversation about what we can do. Who here at one point or another, for those that are tenured, probably been a while for you, has looked at the Texas A&M job board for wildlife biologists? You can raise your hands. Yeah, okay. This was about, I'd say, less than 5 minutes worth of work. First page. Some of these are not even field work based, but these are the physical requirements that were listed under jobs. I think one was a rabbit survey. One was doing data analysis. There was a few that were literally just desk jobs, a few that were lab-based jobs. And I don't know where the copy and paste for 50 pounds has come from, or the 10 miles, but I can assure you, most of these jobs aren't doing this. And most of the people in this room wouldn't be able to accomplish that as able-bodied people to begin with. And that's what Dr. Anita Marshall kind of starts to talk about. We start to have this conversation around fieldwork. And I'm going to use fieldwork a lot as the examples because I feel like they're really tangible examples of those barriers. They're nice and physical, so it's a lot easier for us to imagine. But it is this idea that you have to be in perfect physical shape. You have to be able to run 10 miles or rugged walking, the 50-pound pack. And there's so many other ways that you can adapt your space, your fieldwork, the tools you use, so that that's not necessary. And I'm sure if we're just adapting this for disabled people, y'all also don't want to be carrying a 50-pound pack 10 miles. There's some benefits. The job postings that kind of list these physical requirements can discourage really great candidates from even applying or getting in the door. And that's one of our major barriers from the get-go, is that we have these young students that are interested in becoming marine biologists, or we have these, I'll say marine scientists, because I know we have some oceanographers, marine scientists, or we have people that are transitioning. They're in their 40s, their 50s, and they're deciding for a career change. They look on these job boards, and this is the first thing they see, and they have no connections to this group. They have no background into this community. If that's the first thing you see, that's a very fast barrier for you. And if it's the first page, these were the first, like, I think it was like 5 or 6 job listings. I didn't have to search for it. I didn't go multiple pages trying to find these screenshots. That's a very quick barrier that we can very easily take away. And not just like framing that we need to include disabled people for their benefit, for our own benefit, we need to include disabled people. And this is probably where I might get in trouble because I will curse right here. Disabled people are innovative as fuck. Like, honestly, most of the innovations that you experience in your day-to-day life are thanks to us. You have a touch screen? Disabled person. You use the little robo vacuum, I can never think of what they're called. Disabled person. Most of the accommodations, most of the things that you use in your life that make your life a whole lot easier were created for or by disabled people. We're incredibly innovative. You want us on your team, especially in marine bio, where we're constantly MacGyvering different things. Innovation is kind of the foundation of what we do. Now, I'm not just saying this and telling you that innovation is good and we need these people. There are so many studies that show that bringing in diverse candidates into a workplace improve your numbers drastically. They improve your innovation, they improve your productivity, they improve your financial output, because financial output was a really nice, easy marker that you could do. There was incredible, deep systematic reviews of bringing in marginalized, diverse candidates. It makes your space more marginalized, and then you have people with different viewpoints helping. You don't want the same 6 people that all have the same life experiences in a room talking about solutions to a problem. Chances are they're probably going to come up with the exact same solutions. What you want on your team is you want those different viewpoints. You want those fresh intakes and ideas. You want diverse people on your team. You want to have that strength, and it is a strong suit to have. So why would you take away the MacGyver in your team that can make your life a whole lot easier and probably a little bit cheaper too? I know we've all done that thing in the field where you're taping something to a pole and you're like, yeah, I don't know how I'm gonna be able to explain this in the paper, but like, we'll figure it out at some point. And you have those MacGyver things, and I do it all the time. You want us on your team. So we're going to go into the wild west of accessibility, some of my experiences, my fieldwork and lab accommodations. We're talking to marine scientists, so most of my examples are going to be marine science, but I have a host of other examples from scientists that I know that aren't marine scientists, that are terrestrial, of my own. My very first job was at the National Wildlife Research Center. I got to work with incredible animals like coyotes, pileated woodpeckers, and bison. When I was 16, I got called down we had these stalks that had bison for the Yellowstone project that was going on, essentially just a repopulation project. I got called down and they're like, you're going to do artificial insemination, which for my very southern Georgia dad, he was very excited about because he had cattle at one point, and he was like, now's the time, girlfriend, you're getting into it. I was a little less excited about that side, but it was really cool to kind of experience these animals. We went down, we were doing tagging, artificial insemination, we were, doing wound care, we were updating ear tags, all that. And then end of the afternoon, they're like, we have a wounded female. So we're gonna blow dart her, we're gonna separate her from the herd, and then we're gonna put new tags on her, clean the wounds and stuff, and get her care. For any of those that don't work with bison, you should know they really hate being separated from the herd. They don't enjoy it. And the herd itself really hates it when you try to separate one of their own. We've also, I'm sure, all seen the videos of tourists and bison. So we're in these pens. I'm me, but slightly younger because I was 15, slightly shorter too. And we're talking, and I'm talking to these cowboys that are working with me. Like, what are we gonna do? How are we gonna separate this bison? And they're like, well, first we're gonna blow dart it. We're gonna sedate her. We're gonna separate most of the herd so she's with only 1 or 2 others, and they're okay with that. You can take smaller groups. And then we're gonna separate her from this smaller group. And I was like, all right, you know what? That sounds easy enough. I'm not doing the blow darting. I can help separate a cow. He's like, all right, so we're all gonna fan out. There's probably 6 about. 6 of us, and he's like, and you're gonna put your arms out and we're gonna walk toward her and kind of separate her from the others, because now she's sedate. She's starting to lag behind. And for those that haven't been in stockyards before, you have, it depends on the stockyard too, and the finances. You have, it's typically about an 8 to 12-foot fence that wraps around. It's the typical, like, white fence that now has a white sheet of metal around it too, so that the bison can't see in, and it just protects them and the outside. And each of these like ribs for what you would consider a ladder hits about, I'd say, 3.5 to 4 feet. So the first one hit me about right here. And I was like, all right, that makes sense. Like this looks like a typical stockyard. We're coming up to the bison. He's like, okay, so she's gonna charge. When she charges you, she gets close enough, you're gonna have to just, hang right, hang left, because they can't do really quick perpendicular turns, and you're gonna have to climb up that fence so she doesn't gore you to death. I remember I like kind of sat there and I was like, what? And he's like, all right, let's go, let's move, people. And suddenly we were moving. And she did charge. And I got really lucky that she charged someone else. But when we have these conversations around safety, something we have all gotten emails from Cinnamon about, not about bison charging, but safety. When we think about safety, not just in field work, but in lab work, we're typically thinking about safety for minor injuries, maybe slightly major. But when we take disability into account and we take accommodations, what could be minor could be absolutely deadly for a disabled person. So it is a bit of a downer, but when we're talking about these accommodations, we're not talking about it in a this makes disabled people's life easier. It's this could be the difference between someone living and someone dying. Luckily, didn't die that day. Here 14 years later, now have a fun story I can tell about bison. But I tell these terrestrial stories because it's just to show that this isn't just specific to us as marine scientists. This is a much broader conversation, but for the sake of today, we'll keep it to the water, because I know that's why we're all here and what we all love. So my experience on boats, I kind of had started to have that experience at the National Wildlife Research Center. I had learned how to start to advocate for myself in terrestrial settings, in lab settings. I had been advocating for myself for quite some time, because at that point, I started in the Paralympics in 2008. So I'd learned how to advocate as a disabled girl for myself for quite some years at that point. So I had that voice. But when you have that voice and you come into a setting you're not used to, that's completely different, and you're learning the rules, it can be really intimidating. So I'd start to learn the rules in the sense of like, okay, I need this lab to be accommodating for me, I need this field work, but it was a terrestrial sense. And I'd been on boats, like fishing boats on a lake, but I'd never been on like really big boats. So when I started at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography at the University of California, San Diego, thank you, Cinnamon, for saying that mouthful, it's not fun. We had those nice RV sprawls that we have here that we're really kind of familiar with, and it was an amazing experience. I had classes that we'd spend all day doing trawls, and it was incredible. It's also some of the most scary experience I had, and it was all rickety chairs and liabilities, and it truly was liabilities. When captains see me come on board, I'm often considered a liability, and I understand it's frustrating for me that they see me that way, but in this sense, I am a liability for that reason. So we would have, I don't know if it's able to be seen here, but in this photo to the right, you can see pretty much only my teeth, but that's because that table hits me about right here. And it's a metal table with metal sides. I did bloody my nose the very first day on a large rocking boat. And that was the only table that we had to do all of our measurements with. There was chairs on board, rickety chairs. Somehow there's always outdoor furniture on boats and outdoor furniture in labs. And that's typically what I end up standing on, that or wheelie chairs. I don't do it here at Hatfield. Standing on wheelie chairs or climbing on countertops. And what you can't see in this photo is my friend Jess, who is wearing the tan coat, white hat. That chair, all the chairs that were there were broken. And that was a 3-legged chair that she was actually holding up in the back so that we could take the picture, and that so I could measure a bunch of fish. And that is the experience that I've grown up on these boats. I've been doing this for a while now, and most of the boats that I'm on are like this. And those are really easy fixes. A new table, we live in Oregon. You can just drive down the street and find a free one. There's really easy ways to kind of make these changes so that, one, I'm not a liability, something a captain doesn't want to board, and also so that other people aren't having a metal table hit them right in the belly button when a boat's rocking. Because I wasn't the only one that was struggling. People were losing their breath. It was a fun experience, but it's also a very challenging experience that doesn't necessarily need to be as challenging as it is. Thank God for the big fish lab though, because I showed up pretty hot, I'll say that. My very first meeting I ever had with the Big Fish Lab was talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion and how the shark community is not diverse or equitable and needs to get better. Taylor passed with absolutely flying colors the very first day because he was like, yeah, this is a major problem. Let's make this change. So a lot of these accommodations I've been able to kind of shape for myself with the Big Fish Lab, and the Big Fish Lab has taken deeply into account with what I've done. And so it's been a nice experiment too on building spaces like our lab and our boat to be more accessible to me. And often it's just a stool for $7.99. I think Taylor Aziz's probably on Zoom. I said that in a podcast a few weeks ago. And afterwards, she's like, yeah, I just bought you a stool, TJ Maxx, $7.99. Really easy change for me. We have a stool. I use it. It collapses on the boat. Somehow the other day we had 3 stools on the boat. Usually we only have the one. So it was with the Big Fish Lab, we've started to have these really, really incredible field experiences that have been accommodated to me. So in this photo, this is the work of Jess Schulte, one of the PhD students in our lab that I think most of you know. We're making a shark vomit in this photo. And at the very bottom of the photo, I'm standing on my stool. We're also using what I think Jess created this. Jess and Josh? Yeah, Jess created this. It's our shark cradle, so it allows us to pull a shark on board, and then we can swing it around, obviously controlled, to the back, and then we can all access the shark without hanging over the side. So not only, and this was way before me, not only is this more accommodating to me, it's more accommodating to everyone in the lab. It's safer for the sharks. And a lot of what we do when we think of accommodations, it's making it better for everyone and safer for the animals that we work with, which I know are a major priority. So a really big, massive shout out to BFL for Taylor and Alex for making this space so accessible and always being willing to hear my concerns and kind of adapt. So I've been very lucky in this space. That being said, we're going to talk about the really scary thing, which is the Americans with Disabilities Act. I think a fear that most people have. It was founded, or I guess was codified in 1991 by President Bush. It gave kind of these basic rights to Americans that had disabilities. It was the foundation of which was the Section 504, which brings a lot of accommodations in educational settings that you may be familiar with. Also just gives disabled people rights and protections. But ADA, I think, is the thing when I'm talking about inclusion that people are the most scared of. When I'm talking about ADA, especially like it could also be to like restaurant owners, there seems to be some misconceptions around it. So while spaces have to comply to ADA, no one is actually making people apply to ADA. So you have to file for permits, especially with new buildings, but there's not someone going around walking in these spaces. There's not an ADA enforcer that's walking into a space and being like, yeah, you know what, these 5 stairs up to your bar with no ramp, yeah, that's you get a ticket for that. Everything that comes up in ADA that's brought to the attention of ADA is done by disabled people. So many of the accommodations or lack of accommodations that people talk about where they're afraid that they're going to get called out for this, it would take a disabled person a lot of time, a lot of resources, and a lot of spoons, which is the energy. So everyone lives with about 10 spoons a day. Disabled people, a task might take them 3 spoons, that might take someone else 1 spoon. So these spoons are, a very finite resource that can immediately disappear. And one is as just a person that is a grad student, I don't have the time to report every single space I'm in that's not accessible. So I think the fear with ADA is when people think about compliance, it's not necessarily the compliance that's enforced, it's the bare minimum. And while it grants us a lot of rights, and I'm damn grateful for this, it is the legal bare minimum. And it's the legal bare minimum that most academia spaces, most universities, most organizations, most businesses are not meeting. It's a legal minimum that most people are not meeting on an academic side from a teacher standpoint. So when we talk about this, I do want to enforce that the bare minimum often isn't being met right now. We do need it to be met, and we need to do a hell of a lot better than it. But that is kind of what we need to think about when we're thinking this, that we do have these protections in place, but it's only to an extent. And so that's when allyship really, really comes in. ADA, though, is absolutely wonderful. If you are needing resources, if you're wanting to put something in your space and you don't know the exact number of inches the sink needs to be, ADA's got your back. I very highly suggest, don't worry, link in the bio. Very highly suggest going to the QR code. It's going to have those links to those resources. It's going to talk about the rights and protections that you have as employers, that you have as organizations and spaces, and that you have as disabled people, because I know I'm not the only disabled person in the room. So I highly, highly, highly recommend checking out ADA. Again, just really want to stress that that is the bare minimum, and many of us are not meeting that. So I think as a crew and as a group, we can absolutely, we can enforce this, we can make those kind of loud changes and be loud about needing those changes, and we can ensure that those legal minimums are met, and then go further. So safety is one of the big concerns, and safety, I know we have weeks dedicated to it here at Hatfield. We talk about it a lot, so it's a very familiar issue that we're all accounted for, but we have a bit of a twist. So who here is familiar with a curb cut? Yeah, most people. Nice. Thanks, Cheryl. Shout out. These weren't a thing until quite recently, in fact. I think it's been the last 4 or 5 decades that they've come into play. They started in San Francisco. So most curbs up until I think it was 1980, someone's going to quote me on this, 1981, I think, but I'll double check that, didn't have those curb cuts. So it was just every single curb was just straight down. San Francisco decided to put these curb cuts in, and suddenly everyone was really, really happy. And it wasn't just the disabled people. It was parents that had strollers and prams. It was workers that had dollies. It was people that had dogs that had short legs. Suddenly everyone was like, oh my gosh, it's like really easy to access. So when we talk about universal access, curb cuts, they benefit everyone and now just have become a standard. So we can very easily make these changes, make them a standard. And it's not just disabled people that, you know, we're fighting and fighting and fighting that benefit it. It's kind of all of us. And I know we're all grateful for these at one point or another. They're incredibly helpful. And then additionally, on the curb cuts these days, you'll see those bumps. For those that don't know, those are just essentially like a blind line. So it's if you're vision impaired, you can see that, or you can technically feel it, I guess, as you walk over it. So you know a curb is coming, or that you just got up on a curb. So that's just 2 in 1 and a very, very easy solution to a very complicated problem. So I'm going to hit you with a lot of solutions because that's the whole reason we are here. I think it's important to note that there are quick and easy fixes, and then there's some of the hardier ones that can be a little bit scarier. And that's okay. We can sit with that scared impact. There's so many guides and resources that can help you through those hardier fixes, including me, who's here at Hatfield. So if you want to implement hardier fixes, email me, find me, happy to help, usually on the 3rd floor. And with that, I founded Disabilities Within Ocean Sciences back in 2021. Back in 2020, as we know, the conversations around DEI kind of hit a more household kind of conversation. Suddenly it was something that was being talked about in a way that hadn't been talked about previous years. And it was incredible. Incredible organizations were founded, like Minorities in Shark Science. We started to have these conversations in these spaces, and it was great. And somehow every single time, these very necessary conversations were happening, but disabled people were still being left out of the conversation. There were flags that were flying that were like, everyone's welcome here, doesn't matter your race, your ethnicity, your gender, and they would go through and through, and I'm like, and your disability, please, and your disability. And it became a thing where I started to get more and more frustrated, where I was like, these necessary conversations are incredible, but we're leaving out the largest marginalized group ever. And in a bit of an annoyance rage, I posted about it. Posted a lot of statistics, made a thing, and someone emailed me back, and they essentially were like, well, what are you going to do about it? I was a little annoyed by that. I kind of sat with that for a while, and I was like, well, shit, what am I going to do about it? There's not a lot of us. I think I'm the only disabled shark scientist. Please, if there's someone else out there, get them in contact with me. But I was like, there isn't a lot of us. Like we are the elders that are paving the way right now. So it's kind of either I do this and, you know, can make a difference, or I decide not to do this, and the other 6 disabled people that are in our field also aren't able to do it, and suddenly we don't have this conversation. So I founded it, Disabilities Within Ocean Sciences, which is also known as DWOS. Provides a network and resource for disabled marine scientists at any career level. It's really important that I stress that it's at any career level, because I think a lot of these DEI organizations are incredible, and they typically will focus on early career or incoming marine scientists. While it's amazing, as disabled scientists, we don't have enough to do that. There's not enough for us to say, here's our aspiring and here's our late career. We just don't. So we have that network for everyone, and it has the resources for both. So you might be in this field. You may have been in this field for 40 years. You're used to this field. It's incredible. You have no disabilities, and suddenly diagnosed with MS or arthritis, or you're injured and you're battling a system you've never had to battle before. And that's why we have DWOS. So it brings in those aspiring marine scientists, but it also ensures that people that are established within this field or switching fields have these resources and guides. We also provide training and resources for organizations, academic institutions, research stations, societies, large-scale organizations like the National Academy of Science and the National Science Foundation that give them resources so that they can become more accommodating too. So we're not just here for disabled marine scientists, we're here for you to make your spaces more accessible, to make your practices more accessible, to make your science more accessible, and to make your crews more accessible. What have we done with that? A lot of it has been me talking to audiences like you, going to schools. I've worked with the Western Society of Naturalists. I'm on their DEIC doing work. I've worked with GMIH, which is a joint meeting of ichthyologists and herpetologists. I've done work at the University of Oregon, OIMB. Worked with NSF, the National Academy of Science, and countless other organizations. We've created guides. We have done networks. We recently just did a massive disability audit of 5 major scientific organizations through NSF. So it's just some of the tip of the iceberg stuff that we've been doing. It has been just me so far. We now have a board that's going to be official this summer, which is really exciting. If you're wondering about a logo, I know it's technically been 4 years since I've been founded, but I actually have someone working on it. It's coming this summer, which is really exciting. We have a website that's going to come this summer. It's finally in the progress. I am a grad student running a large-scale organization. So, but we will have that coming up too. So we are starting to get that ball rolling, and I'm starting to see more and more people reach out, more and more people that are interested in getting involved. My board's getting bigger, which is exciting. It's not just me shouting into the kind of darkness about this. We're starting to have organizations like Access Fest at the University of Oregon. So they had a week-long Access Fest that was all the different accessibility things that they can do. It was trainings for their students. They brought in a bunch of different scientists to talk about this. Brought in Amy Bauer, who, if you don't know who Amy Bauer is, absolute powerhouse of a disabled marine science. She's also, I think, maybe one of the most tenured marine scientists in the US, who's also blind, which is really exciting. And so we have this kind of conversation, and we're getting this ball rolling, and now you get to participate as well. And I do want to remind everyone, this isn't to get political, but there are obvious efforts right now to reduce this language in these communities and around this topic in certain scientific settings. And it's more important now than ever that we have these conversations. My belief that these conversations are incredibly vital, and that inclusion will always, always, always benefit us. So right now, where it may seem like things are under attack, this is the absolute best time to be having these conversations and making these changes. Let's go into the quick fixes. The ones that are easy, the ones that are really nice. I feel like it always is good to start with quick fixes, because when you're talking about disability, it's the fear of the big fix. But the quick fixes are language. They're asking questions. They're asking questions. It's being involved. It's not assuming. So I have 2 different stories I'm going to hit you with here. This is a photo that Maddie English took of me at last year's GMIH. I put in an accommodation form. Essentially, I need a step stool. I showed up, and the stool they had for me was about this high. For those that can't see that, that's about 6 or 7 inches off the ground, I think. It was a box, actually. I'm fairly sure it wasn't even a stool. And the podium came to like right here. So 6 or 7 inches isn't going to give me a whole lot. So for the entire conference, every talk I did was on a chair like that. I had a judge who I know, so it's definitely not a marine science one, but a judge that I know that was showing up for a speaking engagement. She said, like, here are my accommodations, here's what I need. And she showed up, and they're like, we got you a wheelchair ramp. We got you this tiny elevator to get up here. We've brought this down for you so it's wheelchair level. They went all over this stuff, and she was like, that's so great. I don't have a wheelchair. She's like, I'm not a wheelchair user. Like this ramp's awesome, but like it's not really doing a whole lot when I have vision and hearing impaired. Like that's great, but like I don't know that that really helps me. And so the big one is ask, have these conversations. It's really easy. It might also save you some time and energy making unnecessary accommodations. Now there's that allyship and accountability. So it can't just be disabled people and you asking what language you should use for those in reference. It's disabled, it's not handicapped, it's not special needs, not crippled. If you are disabled, it's a whole other thing. For dwarfism, it's dwarf for little person, it's not the M word. But it's making sure your language is inclusive. It's asking, how can I accommodate you? How can I ensure what are the easy things I can do to make this safe space for you? What is the 1% that I can change that suddenly is going to change 90% of your day? Like, what are the things that I can do for you? It's staying accountable in those spaces. This is one that I say that I think sometimes makes people uncomfortable. The next time in your lab space, get on your knees. Get on your knees, pretend your arms are, I think mine are about 1.5 feet. Pretend your arms are 1.5 feet. Normally, don't pretend you're a dwarf in any other setting, but when you're experiencing, thanks Cheryl for the laugh, when you're experiencing a space, go ahead and think in that way, because I think it makes it a lot easier. I just looked at a space down in San Diego for a large-scale conference. They called me and they're FaceTiming me and they're like, oh yeah, there's this wheelchair ramp over here and this door is automatic. And I was like, yeah, that's so great. Can you get down on the ground real quick? And I need you to run your hand over the tile. And the guy was like, what? I was like, yeah, just like run your hand over the tile. And he was like, okay. He's like, oh yeah, there's a bit of a tilt there. And I was like, all right, bit of a tilt. So that's something to think about. If you have issues, bring your feet up. And I was like, okay, as you walk through there, I want you to not lift your feet. And he tripped on FaceTime. He was like, oh, well. I was like, yeah, well, if you have any muscular issues, if you have mobility issues, if you have balance issues, you're not going to be able to transition from that carpet to that tile. And it is simple things like that. Be in your space and think, if I can't do this, can I access this space? Can I do this thing? Be on a boat in a safe setting and think, if I have a limb impairment, if I can't hold things for long times or balance issues, what can I do to make this boat more accessible to me? And it is those little things, that bit of accountability. It's also aids. And I have aids in here as a quick and easy fix, because I think when we think about adding in things to our structures, we think they're really expensive. But a study showed that the average kind of big accommodation fix costs about $500. The good news is it's about a $500 cost you're only going to do once. You're not building multiple wheelchair ramps in the same spot. Once you got it, it's there. You're good. You're done. And there's so many rebates and there's so many stipends and scholarships and funds and grants and stuff that will help cover those bigger ones. But when we're thinking about this in terms of money, often these accommodations are not as expensive as we tend to think they are. So I have it in the quick and easy fixes, because think of these smaller things that you can do that are quick and easy to make a space more accommodating to you and others. And now on to the hardier fixes, the ones that are really scary. I think these ones can be kind of terrifying. I just gave a talk to a school, very much the same as this one. It was just a little bit heavier on the shark puke. And I had a student come up to me after, and they're like, I'm disabled, and I really appreciate you coming to talk to me. I want to become a shark scientist. And I was like, let's go. We need more disabled shark science. And they're like, I recently had a field experience and I'd like your advice. And I was like, heck yeah, like tell me about your field experience. They're like, well, I crawled. I was like, I don't know what that means. What do you mean you crawled? And like I crawled, and I was like, okay, I need more background. Because at this point I'm getting a little annoyed. Not at them, but at the situation I know is about to come. So they had a field class. It was in the Rocky Intertidal Zone. Something maybe some of us are familiar with. And you've experienced walking in tidal zones where you can very easily not have to climb down to them or not climb over them, but you can walk up to them and they're right next to you and you can experience that. No, their field class decided to have it in the type that you have to scale. The student had mobility issues. She had balance problems. She wasn't able to really make those big moves. So in order to access and to pass a class that was required, she got on her hands and knees, bloodied her elbows and her knees to access this field site. So when I'm talking about the hardier fixes, the ones that I think might make people uncomfortable, It might be changing your fieldwork locations. It might be changing your research locations to be more accommodating for disabled people and to be more accommodating and safer for other marginalized identities, because we know that there are parts and regions here in the US and in the world that might be dangerous to certain marginalized identities. So those harder fixes, it might be changing your locations and your spaces. And it could be a very easy change from those really, really rocky, you're having to climb tide pools to the ones you can easily access from the soft sand. One of her solutions was that she now uses those gardening pads where, you have like a piece of foam taped to your knee, and she can now access more spaces. And it could be something simple like that. It could be recording. We do a lot of drone work here at Hatfield. It could be recording a field site so that someone can access it that might be able to go into there. It's going to be a lot of hiring interpreters and guides to make your space more accessible for things like this, having CCs, implementing trainings, consistent trainings. It's not a one-stop shop. You can't do that single DEI training and be like, yep, nope, I'm done. This does count as a training. It's great. This is the dip in the toe, or the toe dip in the water for you. But this should not be okay, now I know about disability and I can move forward. It's a consistent training and ensuring, especially as we have some PIs in this room, it's ensuring that you're consistently doing those trainings. You're thinking about those fieldwork accommodations. You can send out a form too. We have someone here at recently graduated at Hatfield who at a previous job was talking about when they had to access lava fields and they would consistently trip all the time. The people that were in this field work, they'd be walking really fast over these kind of really rocky areas, tons of holes, and they trip and they roll their ankle, and it was constant. And they finally got to the point where it was like, this is no longer working for me. And they talked to the advisor, and the advisor was like, yeah, like we can slow down, we can take some breaks, but we'll see, we'll maybe move. They slowed down, they take some breaks, and suddenly the entire class, the entire fieldwork team was like, oh my gosh, thank you. Like, this is so much easier for all of us. And it is. That's why I keep reiterating that most of these changes, it's not just the benefit to the one, it's the benefit to the whole and the all. So they are the hardier fixes, the ones that can be scarier, but ultimately they're going to make they're going to make your team and your science much, much better. Here at our beloved Hatfield, we are doing incredible, incredible work, and there's still so much to be done, but this was really, really, really a kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop moment for me, because I was like, this can't actually be this good. I've now been at Hatfield for around 3 years, and gotta say, we are one of the gold standards in these spaces. There's always work we can do, but we have amazing stuff. When I first showed up, Tammy and Cinnamon were like, all right, what do you need? And now, if you're in the bathrooms, you will notice that there's a stool there and the soap dispensers are closer, and that was a fairly easy fix that now is a lot more accommodating to me. We have kids and families that consistently access this space during Marine Science Day. I saw them using the stools. I saw them using the soap dispensers. It is a fix that we were able to implement and we can continue to implement that brings Hatfield to a much more inclusive space for everyone, not just us. My favorite thing about Hatfield is we have a massive wheelchair ramp that wraps around our building. Yes, it's technically for tsunamis, but I mean, it's just a big wheelchair ramp. She's really pretty. And there are those things. It was the same as when the first time I was asked to come into the lab space, I was like, okay, I'm gonna bring my stool. I'm probably gonna be on my knees on a wheelie chair. I'm just gonna have to a lot of it is me being like, no, I promise. I've done this before. This isn't great. We need to change this, but I've done this before. And I showed up and we had these amazing, incredible rolly countertops. They are about right here and we use them all the time. They are an incredible asset. I can pull them out, I can move them around, but we're doing really good work already. So this isn't me to say that we're at ground zero. At Hatfield, we're doing great things and we can expand it even further. And I always end with the mother of the disability rights movement, Judy Heumann. For those that don't know her, I highly, highly recommend looking her up. She was incredible. But change never happens at the pace we think it should. It happens over years of people joining together, strategizing, sharing, and pulling all the levers they possibly could. And gradually, excruciating slowly, things start to happen. And then suddenly, seeming out of the blue, something will tip. And we are absolutely at that tipping point. We're having these conversations. We're having organizations create RAU experiences specifically and only for disabled people. this conversation is happening, and it's happening more and more frequently. So we're at the tipping point, and I absolutely invite you to be uncomfortable and to join me in kind of tipping this over into a way more inclusive scientific community. So thank you for coming to my talk. There's the beloved QR code. She's constantly updated. So if you want to take a picture of it and come back to it, you can. I want to give a special thanks to 4Ps and a T, obviously Dr. Taylor Chappell, Alex McInturf, Maddie English, who I think at this point has probably heard this talk 16 times through a variety of different conferences and spaces, the rest of the Big Fish Lab, the incredible team over at Minorities in Shark Science, which we just kind of send different students each other's way. So they'll get a disabled student, I'll get a BIPOC student, and we just keep sending each other these amazing opportunities. So shout out to Miss and to the disabled marine scientists that have come before me and paved the way. You have my eternal gratitude. So thank you. And with that, if you're interested, if you have other identities, you want to get involved, here's some organizations that are focused on improving inclusion in marine science. We have the absolute incredible beloved MISS, which is Minorities in Shark Science. We have Black in Marine Science, MIAS, which is Minorities in Aquarium Zoo Science. We have the 500 Queer Scientists, the 500 Female Scientists, and then over in the corner, the one doing it all around disability right now, the IAGD, which is the International Association of Geoscience Diversity, and they're the ones that are doing most of the articles that I quoted today around disability stuff. So these are just some of the organizations. You can take a picture of this too if you want. But if you want to get involved, I heavily, heavily recommend. I can make that connection for you, or you can reach out. But I'm not the only one that's doing this work, and I'm not the only one starting this conversation. With that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you very, very much. No, you're okay. So we're running up against our time. So if anybody needs to leave, you can go ahead and go out the back door if you can, or come out the front. But we'll take a couple of questions if we've got it. Any questions online, Roseanne?
No questions, but have a couple of comments. First of all, amazing talk, Reilly. Thank you for sharing with us. You could never have too many stools, and you could never have too many spoons. That's it.
Thank you. How about questions in the room? Okay. See how I can get to you.
Yeah, if anyone has spoons to lend out, a disabled grad student, I will gladly take some.
I'm going to ask for help. Pass it down.
Hi, Cheryl.
Hi. That was so good. And I think we need that to happen again when the undergrads are here, if you're up for it.
I cannot hear.
Oh, sorry. How about now?
I can't. I got you.
I think we need to do this again when all the undergrads are here. I think this would be such a good thing.
Probably, yeah.
So my question is that in doing this sort of work, we often have to say the thing, which is hard enough the first time. And then we often have to say it 10, 20 times until sometimes our volume has to go up. And I'm curious if you have any suggestions, maybe for resilience, for allies to try to help do this work, especially those who don't have any of these sorts of experiences and cannot relate to marginalization or this particular axis of marginalization.
I have a few actually, and this I think is just in general for marginalized people. And it's, if you're exhausted, you need to imagine just how exhausted we are living our life, not even advocating, but just how exhausted we are living our life, having to navigate these spaces that weren't made for us, and then how exhausted we are navigating these spaces and having to advocate. And I think it is kind of that level of rage that comes in. It's also consistently, you fill your life with disabled people, fill your life with marginalized people. It could be you suddenly are following people with disabilities on Instagram, you're watching movies, because I think it's, you have these reminders, and it's the same thing as when you have a training and you feel really jazzed up about the training, and then that's all you have. And after a while, you might start to lose that passion. So it is that consistent, and it is effort, but it's that consistent effort of remembering that it's your duty as allies to take that torch and carry it for us, because often it is us just getting to the point of pure exhaustion and having to keep going because we can't live in these spaces unless we advocate for ourselves. So it is go ahead, I guess, and take our rage and use that, fuel it using our rage. Read books, watch documentaries. Another one is when you start to be like, okay, you know what? I feel like I've done enough. Go to a new space, experience that space. Think of it in a different disabled sense. It is going to be kind of consistent advocacy, but I find that much like a muscle that you start to flex over and over, it becomes a lot easier. It becomes a lot easier because you're consistently thinking about it, and it just becomes a natural train of thought. And I think it's the same that like my family and my friends go through is, I go into spaces and like, hey, we knew this wasn't going to be accessible, so we did X, Y, Z. Or I already had this conversation with this person because I knew that was going to be too much for you. And it is constantly also asking. Like you can make certain assumptions. You can say like this obviously it's not an accessible space, or this conversation, this language is not good and I need to do a call out, and maybe I'm a little uncomfortable, but it's not just disabled people that are exhausted. It's also we could be really scared. And you have to think of how can I help alleviate that fear and how can I make something more safe for someone. So it is kind of that consistent muscle flexing that you have to do. And pure stubborn will sometimes, honestly, it is, you will get to the point of pure annoyance, and go ahead and let that annoyance show. Because if you are able-bodied and you're annoyed, people might listen to you a little bit more. So go ahead and use that annoyance and use that passion. Talk to disabled people, ask how you can do to help. Once you've done something, you can be like, hey, all right, you know what? We got that. We got those stools for you. What else do you need? Like, what's your next 1%? So it's going to be constant conversations, but they do become a lot easier, and they become a lot easier for you to adapt to and start to think in a more critical sense. Yeah. Any other questions?
But I just want to say thank you so much for being here and sharing with us. I appreciate it a lot.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
All of you, thank you for coming and being part of this conversation today. I appreciate it. One more round of applause.